I would like to open this first at-home homecoming
by recognizing that Mcgill University is on land which long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe nations. We acknowledge and thank the diverse Indigenous people whose presence have enriched this territory on which peoples of the world now gather.
En cette toute première édition des retrouvailles virtuelles, permettez-moi d'abord de souligner que l'Université Mcgill est située sur un territoire qui a longtemps été un lieu de rencontre et d'échange pour les peuples autochtones, notamment pour les nations Haudenosaunee et Anishinaabe. Nous saluons et remercions les divers peuples autochtones qui ont enrichi de leur présence ce territoire qui accueille aujourd'hui des gens de partout dans le monde.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Irina Kostko, and I'm currently the first Vice President of Mcgill Women's Alumni Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to Mcgill's inaugural at-home homecoming. It is the first event, and it's a virtual event, and it kicks off the celebration. Although it would be very nice to greet you all in person, it is not that bad being at home and tune in from the comfort of our homes. As you likely know, every woman who graduated from Mcgill is a member of Mcgill Women's Alumni Association. We began as a group in 1890, and that was the first group of 8 female graduates of the university who started MWAA. MWAA has grown since to be a big group and now includes thousands of Mcgill female graduates as members. In the past 130 years of the existence of MWAA, our mission has remained simple and steadfast: to advance the leadership potential of Mcgill's female graduates. We are also proud to be part of an important tradition of resistance against oppression and injustice, advocating for equal rights on campus and across Canada. Through philanthropy, events, and activism, the MWAA promotes the positive impact that our alumni have on the university global community. MWAA invests in the next generation of leaders by supporting the educational ambitions and activities of the women who will join our ranks upon graduation. MWAA Endowment Fund allows us to award about 15 scholarships per year. In addition to supporting current students, every year we invite distinguished speakers and we organize various networking events for our alumni. This academic year is not an exception, and you will definitely see many MWAA events in the alumni calendar. We are starting our program of this academic year with today's homecoming event. Before our keynote speaker presents, I'd like to introduce the moderator of today's event, the Honourable Eleni Bakopanos. Ms. Vakopanos served in the House of Commons as a Member of Parliament between 1993 and 2006. She is a passionate advocate for women's equality, empowerment, and social justice. She has served as a president of MWAA and has been a board member for many years. Eleni is currently the honorary president of Mcgill Women Alumni Association. Ms. Vakopanos also presently serves as a treasurer of Equal Voice. This is an organization focused on electing and supporting women in political office. She is also a vice president of the Canadian Association of Former Parliamentarians. Eleni is grateful to Mcgill for the world-class education that Mcgill provided to her, her husband, and her daughter, and for the strong foundation it helped her to develop in order to face the professional challenges. Please welcome MWAA past president and honorary president, Eleni Bakopanos.
Hello, everyone, and welcome, and thank you, Irina. I'm delighted that everybody was able to join us today and in this wonderful first day of fall. And I am pleased that so many of you have decided to join us to hear our special guest and keynote speaker, Professor Patricia Hewlin. In a moment, you'll hear from Patricia. In the meantime, if you wish to submit any questions, you can during Patricia's presentation, or you can submit at any time after the presentation. We will proceed by, as I said, introducing Patricia, then there will be an exchange between Patricia and myself, and then we will open it up to questions and answers. It is really my pleasure actually to introduce Patricia. Professor Hewlin is an associate professor at the Desautels Faculty of Management. She's also the ombudsman for students for Mcgill and has been quite busy lately being an ombudsman despite the virtual reality we all live in. She specializes in organizational behavior and explores how members of organizations and their leaders engage in authentic self-expression. She also researches the factors that impede authenticity in the everyday workplace. Dr. Hewlin is particularly motivated to help people integrate more of their true selves. And I remember you saying, Patricia, about the Shakespeare saying, "To thy own self be true," which applies. And she assists leaders in creating safe environments where employees can freely express their authenticity openly and without repercussions. Her research has been featured in several scholarly journals, as well as in Harvard Business Review, the Huffington Post, the Times, and the Globe and Mail. Please welcome everybody, Patricia Hewlin. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate the warm introduction, Eleni, and I thank the MWAA for their invitation and kind introduction. In the late 1960s, my family was one of the first Black families to purchase a home on our block in a neighborhood called Laurelton in Queens, New York. I vividly remember my first best friend, Maria. We became best friends when I was about 5 years old, and she was 4. Even today, I have warm feelings when I think about Maria and her family. Within about a year of our friendship, however, a new family moved on our block, and our friendship of 2 expanded to include our new friend. But this new relationship came with a problem. This new family was Caucasian like Maria's family, and my new friend's mother did not want to be a part of this friendship. She didn't want me to be a part of this friendship. And even the warm feelings that I can still remember about Maria and her family, I can acutely remember the look of disdain toward me on the face of my new friend's mom. So the exuberant child that I was actually became quite withdrawn in her presence, hoping that my silence and polite stance would gain her acceptance. But it just didn't happen. In fact, I was excluded from our new friend's invitation list of her highly anticipated 7th year birthday party. So you can imagine how devastating that was. While being excluded hurt, I was actually experiencing a righteous angst as a 6-year-old. The injustice of it all. I really felt that way. I felt that my new friend's mom should have done better. And with that angst, I actually followed the group of children into her home. I joined the party. Not only did I join the party, but I fully engaged myself, particularly when it was time to take a stick and beat the piñata. So for those of you who don't know what a piñata is, it's a paper mache figure, sometimes made out of a dog or a cat or some other type of figure, and it's filled with candy, and children take a stick and beat that piñata that's hanging from the ceiling. And after several beats of the piñata, the candy actually falls. And when I think of that story, I see it as symbolic of having to beat doors down into places where I wasn't invited. but deserve to be in the room. I also see the beating of that piñata as symbolic of living a life that marches to the beat of my own rhythm of making room for authenticity to thrive. So what is authenticity? Well, in most basic terms, it's the alignment between our own sense of self, our thoughts, our perspectives, and so on. In my research, I have focused attention on the alignment between one's values and the choices that we make in our daily lives. Our values are our convictions. Our values tell us what is right, what is wrong, how to live our lives and interact with others. They reflect who we are. And so when I was a doctoral student some time ago, a few moons ago, I developed the concept of facades of conformity. And this notion of facades of conformity illustrates how employees often feel pressured to suppress their values and even pretend to go along with the norms and values, behaviors that are considered most acceptable in their work context. Creating facades of conformity is not about deciding whether or not we should paint the office walls or where to move the coffee maker. Rather, it's about silencing aspects about oneself that may be considered unacceptable. This may be viewed as exuding competitiveness when one is typically more collaborative, silencing aspects about one's culture in order to fit in, and also not to trigger negative stereotypes that might be associated with one's identity, whether it's connected to race, religion, sexuality, as I mentioned, culture. This may also include what we wear, our physical attire, how we wear our hair. For example, there's research recently led by Ashley Rosette and colleagues at Duke University that show that Black women with natural hairstyles versus styles that are more likely to be considered straight, natural styles are considered unprofessional. Thus, straightening and adding chemicals to our hair is often considered more acceptable, and it's a pressure that Black women have faced in different work contexts. So in survey-based research that I've conducted over 20 years, I have consistently found that about 1/3 of employees feel pressure to create facades of conformity in one way or another. Consequently, I have also found that creating facades of conformity is associated with emotional exhaustion, decreased work engagement, as well as commitment to one's organization. And so in light of these findings, making room for authenticity to thrive in the work environment and in one's interactions with others is important to the well-being, not only for the work environment, but also for the academic environment, social environments, and the people who actually are in those environments. When we are authentic, we are less likely to experience depressive symptoms. And in general, we experience enhanced well-being, personal well-being. However, even with these benefits, pressures to conform are prevalent, and it requires many of us to proactively and sometimes strategically make room for authenticity to thrive in our lives. I'd like to share a few opportunities, considerations, and even strategies for making room for authenticity to thrive. Making room for authenticity to thrive requires self-reflection and a plan of action for many of us. And part of that self-reflection should include questions such as, what are my core values? What core values are most important for me? to bring into the job or other contexts. So in other words, we don't have to bring everything into one context. So perhaps there are a variety of contexts where we feel that we can exude some core values more so than others. What's important to ask oneself is whether or not we're compromising our core values. Because when we are compromising our core, that's when we're going to experience that emotional exhaustion. So questions should be around what is hidden and why? What's hidden about myself and why? How can I bring more of myself into the work that I do? And be really specific about that. How do I do it and how much should I bring in? What's most comfortable for me? And then why am I doing this? What are the benefits? As well as what are the costs? And in line with thinking about the cost, it's important to note that authenticity can take courage, can actually require courage for some of us. For example, women oftentimes are expected to take on feminine roles, like, for example, taking notes at meetings, or they're expected to be more collaborative. And when they're not, they sometimes receive a negative response or a negative reaction. Aren't you a woman? Aren't you not a woman? Choosing not to fulfill those expectations that are imposed upon us by society can often require courage. For young women who are watching, I highly recommend that you develop a network of other women who have learned to navigate these situations while pursuing their authentic selves. That's a start for this journey. So here's where I give a friendly plug for actually becoming actively involved as an alumna in the Mcgill Women Alumni Association. Making room for authenticity is also an avenue for personal growth and contribution. And so it's not just about yourself. You are engaged in a world with others. And so understand that with that personal growth, you should also be thinking about contribution. Our authenticity may rightfully challenge others, but it should not be used as a weapon to tear others down. And in keeping with this statement, I'd like to talk about the responsibility of authenticity. Making room for authenticity, again, is not just about ourselves. When we primarily live and work in contexts where we experience authenticity and value alignment for the most part, we're just simply free to be ourselves. When this occurs, authenticity is not even a consideration. We're not even thinking about it. We can really take it for granted, which is pretty cool. And so for many of us, authenticity is somewhat of a privilege because we don't even think about it. The caveat to this all is that when we are experiencing our authentic self, we are highly susceptible to being unaware that others in those same contexts may not feel as free to be authentic. Thus, with authenticity comes responsibility to foster an environment for others to thrive. As Mcgillians, we share the common value of leadership and serving the common good. As leaders, we must be aware of others around us and fostering environments for authentic expressions that can help build creativity, learning, and growth. Everyone should be invited to the party to beat that piñata and enjoy the sweetness in life that making room for authenticity offers. Thank you. I will stop here. So I'm actually not hearing Eleni. No, I'm not sure if it's me or.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh,
we are
okay.
on. Thank you. Great.
Thank you. The joys of virtual reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Professor Hewlin. It was wonderful. And thank you for the personal story also about the, see, I can't even pronounce it sometimes, but I know what it is. My first question would be, how can women support each other in expressing ourselves more authentically? Women tend, as you said, and most of your research shows that we tend not to be as assertive in terms of what we want in the workplace in general. And sometimes we feel we have to conform in order to fit in with the boys. And no offense to any of the boys who are out there, it's not meant in that way. I'm glad you all joined us also. But I, in my experience also, and from my background, I find women aren't as open in showing their authenticity as men. So how can we support each other then to bring out that authenticity?
Yes, absolutely. If it's more than one of you in the room, for example, you can support each other's authenticity. So, for example, if you notice that a woman is being quiet, and also the men who are out there, you can really play a big role in this. If you're finding that the airtime is not being given to women in the room, then that airtime needs to be shared. And as another woman, you can also say, hey, Eleni, I noticed that you didn't speak on this. What are your thoughts about this? The other ways that you can do this, and as I mentioned before, is to really talk about how to bring yourselves into the workplace with those who have experience and to really build that network. And also to sometimes we feel that when we are authentic that there's going to be a huge backlash. And that may not always be the case. It might just be us having to build the confidence to try it out. And so you can try with small steps and meetings and to just step out there and see what happens. Because as I mentioned before, sometimes it's just a matter of taking courage to doing it.
I find what you said interesting also in the sense that building a network, but also finding a mentor.
Yes.
Someone who's willing to tell you the truth and to tell you how the organization works and what are your strengths and your weaknesses. I found that's very important also, Patricia, that a mentor helps, someone who's been, and it could be a man or a woman. I've had both in my life who have mentored me along in my profession. But I always encourage young women to go ahead and find a mentor, someone that understands them and does exactly what you just said. When they're being silent, when you know that they have much to offer. So it's important.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is. And again, sometimes it's a matter of just stepping out a bit.
Do you think the virtual reality now that we're living can actually bring out more authenticity, in the sense that you feel perhaps because you're in your home environment that you might be a little more comfortable in coming out and voicing your opinion?
Yeah, it can go both ways, because with this virtual environment, I'm finding that people are feeling more comfortable and they've become a bit more informal. And if one is not part of that informal network, there actually may be more of a pressure to kind of try to fit in. And so, as you mentioned with the boys, maybe talk about some of the topics they may be interested in. and just finding a way to conform even more so. So with that, informality can actually create an environment for increased or pressures to conform. However, in some contexts, that informality actually can bring and develop relationships that one has never had. I have been engaged with a number of employees in different organizations, and they were saying how they have check-ins with each other, and those check-ins have developed friendships. And so it can go in both directions in terms of conformity as well as authenticity.
What about social media? The impact of social media now. A lot of people feel freer to voice their opinions, their values and principles, because there's a lot of anonymity in terms of social media. Do you think that has helped more people become more authentic, or rather silence them?
Yes, and not always in a good way. And as I had mentioned earlier, authenticity can be used as a weapon. And we can say, well, I spoke my mind. I'm just speaking my mind. But in so doing, if we're tearing down others, then I just question motives around that. I always see this notion of authenticity, if we really take it in the form of self-development, that it is about contributing. It is about not only discovering ways where we can be more true to ourselves, but helping others do the same. So I'm not really happy about how authenticity has been weaponized. At the same time, social media is really interesting because it can create somewhat of a pressure to exude what authenticity is perceived to be. And so we have, right? So we have some who will post and actually create a persona that may be contrived as authentic, but really not. So social media is really an interesting apparatus in terms of what authenticity is and how we can play with it and manage it.
Thank you. I am interested in terms of leadership and style of leadership, because it was very interesting reading a lot of not all your research, but some of it, in the sense that you said if a leader is someone who is very much authentic, in some ways that doesn't necessarily bring out the authenticity in terms of the people around him. Maybe he takes up too much space. But I'd like you to elaborate a little bit on that, because there is a paternalistic leadership also, but there's also a team leadership that I've lived also in terms of my profession, that you had to work as a team in order to succeed. Sure. But it was interesting that your research sort of said that it doesn't actually necessarily bring out authenticity in others when the leader happens to be one who is ethical and has integrity.
Sure. So leadership, those of you who are out there who hold leadership roles, you have such an influential responsibility, probably much more than you actually think. And so how you even exude your authenticity, if you have preference on what authenticity actually is, you can convey that and actually create an environment for conformity. So I'll give you an example of when I was in banking and I had a leader who really liked to hear people be very critical of the organization and create solutions. And so she wanted people who were outspoken and just tell me what's not working. And I was much younger at the time, and that's not really my approach. I'm more about solutions. And so I don't really like to start with being critical. But I felt really pressured to do that because that was her style and that was her approach. And so if we were not critical and outspoken about what was not working, then we weren't authentic or we weren't preferred. And so just that alone, in terms of assuming that our style is the best style, it can be conveyed. Even if we don't say it, we convey it because we will reward those who are most similar to us. Now, the other finding that you mentioned, Elena, it's that sometimes leaders unknowingly, when they are known as leaders of integrity, when people really look up to them and they value that integrity, they will actually respond to that goodness by not rocking the boat. They would say, you know what, I respect this leader so much, and I really appreciate this leadership style, that I will support this leader. I may not agree with everything. I may not necessarily want to show too much of myself that's not going to be consistent with what needs to get done. So I'm just going to let this leader do his or her thing. And in so doing, you find that people will actually create a facade in the context of leaders who are highly known for their integrity. And so that really, it creates a particular responsibility on leaders who are known to have high levels of integrity, and that you have to say, look, I understand that many of you respect my leadership approach. I appreciate that feedback, but I need your critical feedback. I need your diverse perspectives. So bring them on, because I want to hear them.
So I'll ask one final question, and then I'll take it as the questions are coming in. I was fascinated by an article you wrote, which was in French, and how you linked conformity and authenticity with the Black Panther, the amazing movie, The Black Panther. Could you name at least one lesson from the Black Panther that we can take away, either one in terms of conformity and one in terms of authenticity? If you want to name more, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you for mentioning that. And it's funny you mentioned that, because as many of us know, the Black Panther, Mr. Boseman, passed away. And so we sending rest in peace, and at the same time honoring the movie and honoring a great deal of learnings that we can get from there. And so some of you might remember when the Black Panther went into a bar in South Korea with two of his comrades, two women leaders and security folks. Well, one of them, her name was Okoye. And Okoye was part of the warriors, the women warriors, and they all had shaven scalps. And I mean, they were strong. And so for those of you who haven't watched the movie, you need to do
Absolutely.
And so she had to kind of fit into this bar. She couldn't go in with her warrior uniform. So she was wearing a wig and a dress, and she's complaining, saying, this is just not right. This is just, I have to do this, but this isn't really me. And so they go in, and then eventually the villain and his people discover that they're here. They're out to get us. And so Okoye says, I've been made, meaning they found me out. And so she starts fighting, and in the middle of that fight, she removes her wig, and she's just getting it on. And I mean, kicking butt. And so I use that as an example to say that authenticity can lead to high levels of performance. That when we just strip away those barriers, those things that are hindering us from really being ourselves, that we can truly thrive. And not only do we benefit, but those around us benefit. Surely the Black Panther benefited because she was able to beat.
Absolutely. But I do encourage everybody to see the movie. I'm going to take questions now from our audience because we're more than halfway through. So one of the questions is, how do you balance our desire to encourage authenticity among those we agree with the increasing tendency to authenticity among those whose views we find abhorrent, such as many of those who are feeling free to express intolerance south of the border right now? And
yeah, I would say let's look at the context. So if we're talking about a work context, that's just not appropriate to have those conversations. And so one response would be, let's center our conversations around ideas that help us do better as an organization, that will contribute to the work that we're doing here. And that should shut that down. If not, I would definitely speak to leadership to say we don't really need to have these types of conversations here. And so now I've had people ask me about, what do you do if they're family members or they're friends and you're finding yourself in these contexts and people are speaking their mind and you feel that their values are just abhorrent? Then you make some choices. You can speak to them on that and explain to them why these are so incorrect, but understand that we are living in a world where views are just polarized, everything's become politicized, and so just understand that you may not receive a really positive response if you find yourself correcting yourself or engaging in these conversations. So the question would be, how worth it is it to engage in this?
Next question is, how can one support a partner, a friend, or a colleague who is prone to always masking their authentic self in the workplace?
Yeah. It sounds like someone close to you, you said a friend or a partner, have a conversation and talk about values, talk about what's important to them. Ask them about the times when they felt that they were most authentic. What were they doing? Who were they with? Let's talk about how we can replicate those experiences. Perhaps they're not in the right context. And talk about that. I mean, are you in the right context? Or perhaps there needs to be a little bit more risk taking in terms of just stepping out a bit more.
Don't you think?
Go ahead.
Don't you think also, if you're a friend, you should be true to your friend also? You should really help them along. I think that might be the conversation on the side, as you said, Patricia, to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Having that conversation, but at the same time, I always go back to context. My students really hate when I say there are two words that you're going to hear throughout the semester. It depends. And so there's not always a black or white, and we may be in a gray situation. So you have to consider the relationship. You have to consider what they're masking. If you're talking about someone who's in an environment that's not accepting of cross-cultural values and the cultural competence is like way down, then we have to start evaluating, all right, what are the risks? What are the costs? And so it may not be such an easy conversation depending upon the context.
This is a long question, but I'll read it. How do we determine the line between authenticity and our values? For me, that's the person who asked the question. One of my deepest values is the ability to be authentic. I know that my values are not aligned with the values of the companies I have worked for. Some people can compromise their core values and still feel authentic. Some of us cannot. I have no problem being authentic, but I need to keep my job. That's the big dilemma. A lot of women sometimes stay in jobs where they're actually harassed even. We won't even go there for the moment. And still remain in the job because they have children, they are alone maybe, or they just need to pay the mortgage.
That's
a very good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. So there are contexts where, and again, I am not promoting anyone leaving their jobs because we all need to work. But I will say that you may have to just separate, say who I am at work is who I am at work, and who I am at home is who I am at home, and not go through the mental drama of saying, well, I'd like to see more alignment when the alignment is actually not there. And so then the question is, well, what do I do with those core values that I can't bring into the work? That's really the question for you. So perhaps it's within your family, perhaps it's with community organizations. Think about where you can bring in your true self, because you do need that for your own personal well-being. Now, if you're finding that you are suppressing, I know we didn't want to go too far with the sexual harassment and all of that. I know that it is tough, but please find someone to talk to, because that cannot continue in work organizations. I know it's easier said than done, but there has got to be an ally or someone to whom you could speak so that people can be held responsible for that type of behavior. That's unacceptable.
Absolutely true. Speak up. And I think the Me Too movement has proven that we have to speak up if there is any harassment.
That's it. The same with discrimination.
No silence.
Mm-hmm.
No silence on this. For certain cultures, this is another question, Professor Hewlin. For certain cultures, authenticity is not natural. So how do you overcome that in our current world, especially during a pandemic that we are all living and online, and expected to show and share ourselves and voice? I think part of it you've answered, but it is interesting that certain cultures, women in general and young girls are taught not to speak up. They're actually taught the opposite.
Sure, sure. And so you're feeling a bit uncomfortable because you've been raised a certain way. Yeah, and then sometimes I'm thinking back into that context where you're kind of forced to be something or be someone or say something that doesn't quite feel good for you. Again, it's a matter of asking yourself, what does authenticity mean to me? I always say that one size does not fit all. And so your authenticity is not going to look the same as someone else's authenticity. So what does it mean to you? Because for you, you may say, well, I don't have to be outspoken to feel like I'm true to myself. And if that's the case, go for it. Authenticity is not about verbal expression. It's about lifestyle. It's about behaviors. It can involve verbal expression, but it's more about what's important to you. And to what extent are you able to integrate what's important to you in the different contexts? So don't allow that pressure to come on you. If it's not working for you, that's fine. But I always also say that don't allow fear to cripple your self-development. So in other words, it may be that you have to develop different skills to be more successful in the work that you do. Developing those skills and making you a stronger professional doesn't mean that you're compromising your values. It just means that you're learning different behaviors to be more successful in the workplace.
So I'm going to combine two questions here because we're going to run out of time perhaps. So for people who aren't in leadership positions, is there one or two suggestions that you can give them in order to be able to create, and especially if they're working on their own and they're the only woman? I combined the two questions. There was a question about being the only woman or one woman in the office. How do you create that authentic workspace for your colleagues and yourself?
Sure. Again, what is important to you? What does authenticity actually mean to you? And that should be the primary question. What does it mean to you in terms of authenticity? What are your core values, and to what extent do you feel that you have to suppress them in the workplace? Or what are ways where you can add more to the workplace in terms of something that reflects who you are? It could be a cultural artifact that you place on your desk, or a piece of art on your wall that symbolizes maybe your identity. That's something that's important to you. A picture, a book. What would help you to feel more authentic in the workplace? If you feel that you need more support in sharing and expressing your concerns, have a conversation with your leader to say, look, I'd like to think about authenticity. And they may look at you and say, well, what are you talking about? Well, I was at a session. Well, you know, I graduated from Mcgill, and we had a session on authenticity. And I'm discovering that I actually have not brought a lot of myself in. And these are the ways I'd like to bring more of myself in. And I would like your support in that.
Everybody has something to offer in any work environment. That's what I've learned. And you can always learn from others, but at the same time, speaking up, I think don't stay silent. You do talk a lot about facades. And in fact, you wrote something very interesting about the award for best actor, which I thought was kind of interesting, and how facades of conformity within the organization tend to create an environment that really isn't conducive to creativity and advancement. So, so who does the Best Actor Award go to in general in a workspace, Patricia?
Yeah, it's unfortunate that if the award is fitting in, the award would be sometimes receiving a sense of survival and success by being able to fit in. But the irony of it all is with the fitting in comes the emotional exhaustion. And I also found in my research that the more people create facades, the more likely they are to leave their work context. So I would ask, like, to what degree do you see yourself leaving your organization within a year, within 2 years, and so on. And so it's a really difficult dance because you want to fit in, you want to exude those characteristics and perspectives that would allow you to move on, but then it creates a bit of stress. And so balancing, finding that perfect balance is a journey. It's not something that we just come up with right away, but it's important for us to embark upon that journey so that we can bring more of ourselves without sacrificing who we are.
Is it fear that holds people back?
It's
Is
fear.
It
fear
or self-doubt?
That could be involved as well, but fear of offending others, fear of potentially losing one's job. The offending others is a big to-do. Fear of not being accepted, being excluded. Fear of highlighting stereotypes. And so if you have an identity that's connected with a number of negative stereotypes, and you mention something about your culture or whatever it is, people may start thinking, oh, he's one of them or she's one of them. I had a student, she said that she mentioned to someone on campus about women's rights, and the response was, oh, so you're one of those protesters. And so we have to deal with some of that negative feedback, and that's why it's a challenge. But even with that, I say we don't give up, because there's so many rewards to finding that sweet spot in terms of my contribution. What is my contribution to this world, and where can I do it most effectively?
There's a very interesting question about, I'll read it out as it was sent. Some people are invited to try to join the public sector, which is usually more value driven than the private companies, which are more profit driven. Do you feel that there is a difference in expressing yourself or being authentic, the public versus the private sector?
I have not seen any findings that would tell me one way or another regarding that question, but I would certainly say that in contexts where the values are very strong, it's important to just reevaluate those values and your fit. Because when you go into that organization, you're going to be expected to align yourself with those values. So it's very important. If you think that you're joining an environment with very strong values, it's critical that you determine whether or not you actually can thrive in those contexts.
I think a lot of the questions that I'm getting have to do with the fear, okay, about backfiring on me if I'm not conforming to a certain mold that is set up. And what if there's a push in terms, or let me put it another way. Do you think women leaders allow for more creativity, more authenticity, and less conformity? Because there's a couple of questions about the different styles of leadership. Because I know from my background in politics, women bring a different style of politics. Not all women and not all men, let me be clear. But there is a change that takes place, and we've seen it during this pandemic, about how women leaders have handled the pandemic differently. Angela Merkel, the New Zealand Prime Minister, and others have handled it slightly differently and much more effectively.
Yeah, and those styles are what is being rewarded to have higher levels of emotional intelligence. That's been a very big issue of recent in terms of the pandemic, just being able to take perspective and being more self-aware. There was a recent report, and I think it was Boston Consulting Company. Please don't quote me, but I think it was. They'll say you were wrong, but
they'll Google it, Patricia.
Right, exactly, and they will. I know you will. But in that report, there was a finding that when women are in leadership roles, CEO roles in particular, that they are more likely to engage in D&I, diversity and inclusion efforts, which would have an impact on the bottom line of the organization. So there is certainly something there in terms of perspective taking and inclusion that we can certainly connect with women leadership.
I found it interesting that you reviewed a book by John Maxwell, and it was called Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn, and that life's great lessons are gained from our losses, which I have to say I agree with. I've learned more in life in terms of my losses than I've learned sometimes in terms of my wins. So that fear that's out there, perhaps we should recommend the book to a lot of people to say, read the book. But would you like to comment on what his biggest lesson for a loss is in terms of connecting it to authenticity? Perhaps you become more authentic once you've seen that conforming didn't get you where you wanted to go, but your loss may awaken that in you.
Sure. I would say that, I think about the pandemic and I think about crisis in general. One of my mentors would say that crisis reveals the cracks. The crisis really shows us who we are. We would often say, well, I would never do that, or this is what I would do, but we really don't know until we find ourselves in those situations and we discover more about ourselves, and we should discover more about ourselves and learn. And that's why I like Sometimes You Win, you're in alignment, you know what you need to do, you got it all together. Yeah, that happens from time to time. But oftentimes we quote unquote lose, but that loss is actually a gain because of the learnings that are associated with that. And with that learning, we become more self-aware and we can make better decisions for ourselves because we know who we are a bit more.
I have one more question, and then I'm going to have to wrap it up. Someone was asking, actually, Professor Hewlin, if the Black Panther article is in English.
No, although I wrote it in English.
Google, translate Google, you'll find most of it there.
Yeah. So this was for Huffington Post, Quebec. And
yes.
So my colleagues were very kind to help me get it translated. So, but thank you. I'm sure you'll be able to find it.
I'm sure everybody's going to be reading that article now, but I found it fascinating. How has the media, last question, and then I'll wrap it up.
Sure.
How has the media helped or hindered how women's roles in society are perceived? And at the same time, does the media, as we said earlier, does it really help in terms of encouraging people to be more authentic?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about that. Media can be really tricky, and especially now when it's polarized, so that sometimes it's difficult to find their true stories. And so I think of the movie Forrest Gump, and he says, life is like a box of chocolate. You never know what you're going to get. And when I think of the box of chocolate, some of those flavors I absolutely love. They're authentic to me. So sometimes we get the quote unquote truth, and sometimes we just don't. And so it's important for us to do our own research and not rely on one specific stream of media, but to read books and engage with people who are different than us to really get a better understanding of the world around us.
So I want to thank everybody for those great questions, but specifically, we ended up eating the best chocolate today, Patricia. Thanks to you. Thanks to you. And as I said, I think everybody should see the movie Black Panther and at the same time read your article. So I want to thank you so much for stepping in and helping the McGill Women's Alumni Association celebrate, because we are celebrating. This year, we are actually celebrating our 130th anniversary.
Wow.
And so we have a series of celebrations, but thank you so much, Patricia, for the great launch of our celebrations, and also the great launch of Homecoming, which is so exciting. I remember my days as a McGill student being so excited with all the activities that are going on. And I'm sorry that it has to be virtual now for a lot of the students, but I'm sure you and other professors will make it very interesting for them, especially the subjects that you have. I do want to talk a little bit about the McGill Women's Alumni Association also, because there was a question about from one of our participants in how come they haven't heard of us. Oh, we're a secret society, by the way, which is not true. But most people hear about the McGill Alumni Association, which is the umbrella association of all the alumni, but there are different. We are unique in the sense that we're the only women's alumni association in any university in Canada. We're a dying breed, it seems. And we do have our founders, who were extremely intelligent women, set up an endowment fund, and that has helped us provide scholarships for a lot of female students. And it is one of our signature events to do a scholarship award ceremony. We also do for March 8th, around March 8th, we have the lecture, and we invite special guests who come and also present us with their views on different subjects that affect women or just the general population. But I do want to talk about the fact that we are setting up this year for our 130th anniversary a special scholarship. And in honor of this milestone and to our longstanding, as I said, tradition of supporting academic excellence, we are coming together under the leadership of past presidents who have been the champions of our organization over many, many years, Anelia Wright and Susan Zarnock. Susan also, in fact, is kickstarting our fundraising efforts, which will go on throughout the year, at the same time that also McGill is celebrating its 200th anniversary, which is kind of interesting that it all came together. But Susan has made a very generous contribution of $25,000 to kickstart our fundraising efforts. And I want to thank both of them. I've learned so much from them. They've been great mentors, and I look forward to working with them in terms of making sure that we reach our goal of $130,000 to add to our endowment fund. I do also want to say that anybody who wants to join the organization is very welcome. We do have a Facebook. McGill does post all our events on their alumni events. So please, for the person who asked the question, yes, you are welcome. And yes, we will tell you more about our organization, but you can go on our Facebook and others. I do want to also talk about the fact that, as I said, our scholarships are critical for supporting students and providing opportunities that open doors, and is a key part of Made by McGill, the campaign for our third century, which is a huge fundraising campaign to support the university that we all love and do want to make sure that other young women or young students have the same opportunities we had. So thank you to those that contributed also for today's. We had a number of donations, and that was really very generous of you, and thank you so much for contributing, and hope you will continue to contribute as we celebrate throughout the year. Thank you, everyone, on behalf of all the members of the McGill Women's Alumni Association, and I hope to obviously see you virtually in some of the other homecoming events. Thank you so much, and have a great day.